Coming up on Bridge City News, the U.S. presidential election took place, but we still don't have a winner. U.S. political correspondent Lisa Daftari tells us when we should have the results. Christmas shopping season has begun, and the Alberta RCMP have come out with tips to protect yourself while you shop online. And Conservative leader Erin O'Toole blasts Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for not doing enough to help Canadian business owners.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Millions of Americans have voted, but they still don't know who their next president will be. The presidential race is just too close to call, and more ballots are being counted. Neither candidate gained the 270 Electoral College votes needed to win. U.S. President Donald Trump vowed to ask the Supreme Court to weigh in.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election. So our goal now is to ensure the integrity for the good of this nation. This is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay? It's a very sad moment. To me, this is a very sad moment, and we will win this, and as far as I'm concerned, we already have won it.
Democratic candidate Joe Biden, meanwhile, is asking his supporters to keep the faith as the counting of ballots continues.
But look, we feel good about where we are. We really do. We believe we're on track to win this election. We knew because of the unprecedented early vote and the mail-in vote that it was going to take a while. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted, every ballot is counted.
Now, to weigh in on last night's election results and to try and make sense of it all is U.S. political reporter Lisa Daftari joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, Trump won in Florida and Texas. Biden took California and New York, and surprisingly, Arizona. But we still don't have a winner. Is it like Biden says, we just have to be patient?
We'll have to be patient in order to get some conclusion on all of this, but Arizona is going to be contested. Wisconsin will be contested. Pennsylvania will be contested. Nevada, perhaps, will be contested. It appears that a lot of these states just stopped counting. They were going to go to their mail-in ballots. We have to stop and take a moment here to say, this is 2020. Obviously, everything is historically very different. We are really treading on new territory for everyone and everything. But you also have to remember that this is such a highly politicized, polarized environment and political cycle that both sides are accusing the other of announcing victory. The Trump campaign is furious because many of those states, they had a majority of the count, but all of a sudden they said, we have to go to the mail-ins. And then miraculously, over 100,000 mail-in ballots, for example, were found in Michigan. And they said that 100% of them, 132,000 ballots, 100% of them went to Biden, which just doesn't sound feasible.
When will we know the outcome and who the next U.S. president will be?
That's either going to be tomorrow or the following day. A few of the states said that they're going to stop counting by Thursday. Some said Friday. But remember, an order came out last week saying that North Carolina, for example, or I think another one of the states could count up to 9 days. Look, this makes no sense. Historically, we have never gone to count every single ballot. It has gone to the majority. And I think in this case, we'll have to wrap it up sooner rather than later.
Now, explain the difference between the popular vote and the Electoral College vote.
Yeah, people are very confused by all of this because someone can actually become the president of the United States and get fewer votes than his or her opponents. What the popular vote is the actual number of votes that the candidate gets across the United States, every single vote counting. The Electoral College gives each state, according to its population, that number of votes that goes to the candidate. So the candidate who gets 270 electoral votes wins, and it's based on representation.
Lisa, what happened with the Senate and the House?
Yeah, so all eyes were on the Senate and on the House. The House actually got more Democrat seats, so now they are deeper to the left. And the Senate, they were hoping to flip one or two here and there. It is still a Republican majority, but I think we were able to flip a couple of seats, but we still are in the same balance as we were before, with the House having a majority Democrat and the Senate having a majority Republican.
That was U.S. political reporter Lisa Daftari joining me from Los Angeles. Alberta RCMP has seen a 12% increase of domestic violence calls during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's become evident that the virus is having a detrimental effect on families. The month of November is Family Violence Prevention Month. Lethbridge Family Services is hosting virtual education sessions to drive awareness in our community.
To be able to have conversations about, so why is that difficult and what's happening for you, and open that conversation to these difficult topics that we don't talk about very often, has a big impact for the people in our communities. And so our hope with these information sessions is to approach these topics in a way that's open, it's general, it's welcoming to all, whether or not you are experiencing or have experienced family violence. It's also open to the people who support those people. So really, anybody who logs in to our information sessions can learn something about how they can support other people, and they can learn something about how we can reduce the stigma around this conversation.
Now you can participate in these educational sessions by visiting lfsfamily.ca, and the next one is coming up on November the 10th. Shauna Panay's world turned upside down when she was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. But she says God helped her through her trials, and now she's cancer-free. The Lethbridge woman shared her story with Bridge City News.
I was feeling like a mass in one of my breasts, and I never really thought anything of it, because a year before that I had gone in and they had said it was a cyst.
Her doctor did a biopsy, and that's when her results came back as stage 3 cancer.
I was in absolute shock, because when somebody tells, anybody even says the C word, cancer, right? And a lot of my relatives have passed away from different kinds of cancers. So of course I was, worried and scared and depressed and sad, because you just don't know, right? You don't know what the outcome is going to be.
Panay says she had to use her faith to fight the diagnosis.
Anybody who's been through chemo, it's not a pretty thing. You get really, really physically sick. It's like having a flu times 10 or 15. It's really, really hard on your body. You lose your hair, you lose everything, and you don't have much energy. And, I somehow was able to, and I know it's my faith that kept me, and I was able to work every day through that. And I just knew that I just needed to keep fighting.
As of 2 years ago, Panay is now cancer-free, and she believes it's a miracle.
God's not finished with me yet. I still have things to do in my life. And he just, brought me through this on my journey. And the journey was hard, and it was sad, and it was hurtful. And I just know that I'm a miracle for a reason. Whether it's to talk to other people and bring light to them and give hope to them that, it's not all darkness. It's not all, that we all can't make it and stuff like that. There is hope through breast cancer, and that you can survive through it.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Lethbridge College announced that they will not be competing in the 2021 ACAC winter season for basketball, volleyball, and futsal. The college teamed up with other provincial post-secondary institutions to withdraw from participating due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Kodiak's athletic director says teams will continue to participate in cohorts, and the school will focus on development moving forward.
And that student-athlete experience is one that we really trying to take pride in, because athletics is a great way to life, but it's not life itself. And so, developing as a person, and those are always, I guess you could say, in the background of everything that we try and do as a department. And the coaches have built into that culture, and you can see it in our Kodiak student athletes as well. So now we just have to work together as a team, in the sense of the coaches and administration, to come up with a creative way on, develop now. Let's work on, like professional development, and not just for the student athletes, but for the coaches. Because again, it's a unique year. This is the new challenge. So we're not going to back down from it. We're going to step up. We'll hit it head on and try and make it the best experience that we possibly can.
The decision to participate in future ACAC competition will be evaluated again in the spring. Officials also said student athletes will not lose any athletic eligibility this season. Kodiak student athletes will also receive all scholarships and student awards they're eligible for in a typical season. St. Paul Elementary School in Lethbridge received a generous donation of over 1,500 books this week from a nonprofit group called First Book Canada. The school's principal, Jerry Muldoon, says this is a great way to give kids new books and stack up their library at the same time.
So we're have about 5 or so books going to every kid in the school, and then other ones will be catalogued into the library. The books that we get, or that we have gotten, First Book Canada has got a strong connection with publishers, so they are actually good books that kids will want to read. There's a variety of things in there, everything from graphic novels, for young kids books, for picture books, everything there that anybody would want.
Muldoon says the idea for the book donations first came from the school's librarian. Now, still with schools, Alberta Health announced that there is a COVID-19 outbreak at Chinook High School in Lethbridge. The province defines an outbreak if there are 2 or more confirmed cases. The affected parties have been contacted and are now self-isolating. The province says there are just over 6,100 active cases of the virus in Alberta, including 317 here in the South Zone. The city of Lethbridge has 153 active cases. Lethbridge County, meanwhile, has 36 novel coronavirus cases. The city of Lethbridge is looking for online community engagement on the 3rd Avenue Beautification Project. This means that the 1.6-kilometer stretch on 3rd Avenue between Stafford Drive and Mayor McGrath will look significantly different. Staff from the city's transportation department say this project is not only to improve aesthetics, but to make the streets safer.
And it's just more of a high-level design phase where we're looking to get feedback from the public to see what they would like to see with this corridor. It used to be the Highway 3 through connection through Lethbridge prior to 1980. And so it still very much functions that way with the 2 travel lanes in either direction and parking on either side. So we're looking to make this a little bit more safe, pedestrian friendly. We're looking at cycling infrastructure, all those things that the transportation master plan, the heart of our city, and the cycling master plan have outlined.
Residents are encouraged to check out more details online on the Get Involved Lethbridge website. Families struggling this Christmas will be able to count on some help from a toy tower. Tony Roma's restaurant in Lethbridge will be open for toy donations in order to help build the tower, which provides for needy kids this holiday season.
Our staff have come together this year. We know everybody's been facing some hard times, some different times. So we decided that maybe we could help give back to some local families, and we're gonna start collecting toys for them. It's from newborn all the way up to 18 years old. We're looking for new unwrapped toys. Anything is appreciated. They're all going to the Salvation Army. We're just all super thankful that we have a job right now, and we have some place where we can go, and we have an income to support our families. And I do know that there's some families out there that are struggling, and we're just so thankful that we all are employed. So we thought we would help give back in any way that we can. So when people bring us something, we're gonna also give them a gift too.
The town of Coaldale announced that due to COVID-19 restrictions, its Christmas Light of Nights parade has been canceled this year. It is one of the town's biggest annual events, attracting more than 3,000 visitors each year. Now, in lieu of the parade, the town has arranged a number of other safe activities to keep the Christmas spirit alive. They include a fan favorite Best Decorated Business and the Country Christmas Night of Lights Best Decorated Holiday Home and Yard event. The Christmas holiday shopping season has begun, and the Alberta RCMP have come out with tips to protect yourself from online fraud while shopping. Last year, there were 1,200 reports of fraud greater than $5,000. There were also 70 reports of unauthorized credit card data in Alberta. Some of the tips the RCMP offer include research retailers before purchasing from them, check for reviews and the return policy, only purchase from sites using HTTPS rather than just HTTP. If you finish your shopping, watch your financial statements for unauthorized purchases. Always use strong passwords, and to make sure the Wi-Fi network you are using is always secure, don't use public Wi-Fi.
And the reason behind this is, of course, it's not as secure as using your data protection and whatnot from your home. Also, we do have people that, believe it or not, actually will be looking over your shoulder or looking at your laptop, which you've left unattended, and they're able to gain information from that. They're able to see your credit card number that you've entered. They're able to see your personal information. So it's just better if you're going to be doing this to do it from home or from another trusted place that, you're at.
The RCMP say if you have seen something suspicious, to report it to your local police service. Manitoba's opposition leader is blasting Premier Brian Pallister's call for volunteers to help during the COVID-19 pandemic. NDP leader Wab Kinew says the government is penny pinching and trying to draw attention away from the ICU crisis in hospitals. People are being asked to volunteer at COVID-19 health screening test sites.
Absurd and outrageous. That's what some everyday Manitobans are already saying about the Premier's call for volunteers today. And I would just say, things are going pretty badly for you when Manitobans are mad at you for asking them to volunteer. Right. Again, asking Manitobans to volunteer, it sounds like a good thing when you first hear about it, until you remember that the person asking you to volunteer is the same guy who fired everybody.
Kinew says the province needs to hire more workers, but Premier Pallister says it's not time to hire more people to help deal with the pandemic. Federal Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole says Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is not living up to his father's example as a firm defender of free expression. He says Trudeau did not adequately condemn attacks in France following cartoons that were published mocking the Islamic prophet Muhammad.
Certain political rights are inseparable from the very essence of democracy. Freedom of thought, speech, expression, assembly, and association. Can the Prime Minister tell us whose quote that is?
We will always defend political rights, Canadians' rights, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, all the rights Canadians expect Canadian governments to defend, we will always defend.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Today, Mr. Speaker, but not on Friday. That quote was the Prime Minister's father in a book published while he was Prime Minister. In one generation, the Liberal Party has gone from freedom of speech being the very essence of democracy to this Prime Minister musing about what speech he might limit.
Political reporter Brian Lilly says he does not understand when Christianity is mocked and the government does not stand up for Christians.
There are lots of images often paid for with government arts grant money that mocks Christianity. And Christians have been told you've got to deal with this. So for the Prime Minister to turn around and, when pressed on this issue, because it is Islam, say, no, we can't give offense, that's not freedom of speech.
Catch the full interview with Brian, who will also discuss talk of government-run COVID internment camps that's coming up in the second half of our show. Those Chinook winds were blowing once again in Lethbridge today, but they also brought us some mild temperatures in the double digits. How long will the warm weather continue? We'll have full weather details coming up. We had lots of sunshine mixed with cloud today and got close to 20 degrees once again. The warm weather will remain for the short term, but then a cold front is moving in. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a full look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, that cold front and low pressure system will be bringing cooler temperatures along with some moisture this weekend.
Yeah, those temperatures are going to drop significantly by the weekend, Hal. But until then, we don't want to think about that. Instead, we're going to deal with the wind. We could see some high gusts after midnight tonight, up to 80 kilometers per hour. 12 degrees is the overnight low. Not too bad. Into tomorrow, high of a lovely 18 degrees. But again, we could be contending with that wind up to 90 kilometers per hour by tomorrow afternoon. A mix of sun and cloud tomorrow, as well as an overnight low of 5 degrees. Not too bad. But then comes Friday as we start to approach that weekend, and we're going to see the temperatures start to drop. 7 degrees is the high for Friday here. See some periods of rain on Friday into Friday night. That rain could also turn into snow, and then on Saturday we could see a mix of rain and snow. 2 degrees the high, dropping on Sunday to -7 with snow periods as well. And then the temperature is going to rise a little bit to 2 degrees on on Monday with the sunny skies and a mix of sun and cloud on Tuesday with a high of 2 degrees. So we are seeing temps go from 18 down to -7 this weekend and then back up to 2. Average at high this time of year, by the way, 8 degrees. Average low, -5. 22 was the high temperature on this day in 1949 and -24 was our lowest temperature. That was in 2003. Sun rose this morning at 7:26 a.m. and 5:04 is our Wednesday evening sunset. So let's take a look at tomorrow across the country. What are our highs? Starting on the west coast, could see some rainy conditions in both Victoria and Vancouver, highs of 12 and 10 in those cities. Could see some rainy conditions also in Calgary tomorrow, 15 degrees, the high 11, the high in Edmonton. Edmonton could start the day with some sun as that cloud moves in and see some showers by the afternoon. Now over here in Saskatchewan, we've got some nice temperatures, but wind gusts as well. So sunny and windy in Regina, 20 degrees the high, 17 the high in Saskatoon tomorrow, 16 degrees the high tomorrow in Winnipeg with a mix of sun and cloud. Much the same going on here in Toronto, 16 with partly cloudy skies, lots of sunshine in Ottawa and Montreal with highs of 15 and 16 degrees for those cities. Not a bad day tomorrow at all. Now let's look further east into the Maritimes. Chance of rain tomorrow in Fredericton here, 13 degrees. 10 the high in Charlottetown with a chance of scattered showers. Showers also expected in Halifax with a high of 10 and St. John's, Newfoundland, high of 3 degrees under sunny skies. So there you go. There's your weather.
U.S. futures have fallen back and oil prices dropped after U.S. President Donald Trump made premature claims of victories earlier today at the White House. Trump said he would take the election to the Supreme Court, but it was unclear exactly what legal action he may try to pursue. Earlier, Wall Street futures and Asian shares posted gains as investors were optimistic about the U.S. presidential election. Trump and his challenger Joe Biden are locked in tight races in key battleground states. Many polls are predicting a Biden victory. Canada's merchandise trade deficit came in higher than expected in September. Stats Canada says it edged up to $3.3 billion from $3.2 billion in August. Economists on average had expected it would fall to around $2.6 billion. Stats Can says exports and imports both increased by 1.5%, but both remain below their pre-pandemic levels. The union representing striking Dominion store workers in Newfoundland and Labrador is taking the dispute to New Brunswick and Ontario. Unifor says it has set up secondary pickets at Loblaw stores in Moncton and the Greater Toronto area. The union says the aim is to bring attention to the dispute over wages that prompted 1,400 workers to go on strike last August. The new pickets were announced yesterday after the Newfoundland and Labrador government appointed a mediator to resolve the dispute. Indigo Books and Music trimmed its losses and increased revenue in its second quarter thanks to strong online growth. The Toronto-based retailer says it lost $17.5 million or 63 cents per share for the 3 months ending in September. That compares to a loss of $20.5 million or 74 cents a share a year earlier. Revenue increased by almost 1 percentage point from $203.4 to $205.3 million. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 59 points on the day to finish at 15,998. The Dow was up 367 to 27,847. The S&P 500 was up 74 points to 3443. And the Nasdaq was up 430 points on the day to finish at 11,590. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.48 to $39.14 US per barrel. Natural gas was unchanged at $3.06 US. Gold was down 6 cents to $19.0298 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to $23.91 US an ounce. Wheat is at $265 per metric ton, barley's at $263, canola's at $5.44, and corn is at $269 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 5 cents to $107.88. Feeder cattle were also up on the day, $1.98 to $135.15, and lean hogs were up 95 cents to $66.35. The Canadian dollar was unchanged over the past 24 hours at 76.14 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, millions of Americans have voted, but they still don't know who their next president will be. The presidential race is still too close to call, and more ballots are being counted in battleground states. Neither candidate gained the 270 electoral college votes needed to win. Political analysts say we should have an answer as to whether Trump or Biden will be president by Friday. Some Canadians believe that the Trudeau Liberals may be using the COVID-19 pandemic to push their political agenda. That's according to Toronto Sun columnist and political reporter Brian Lilly. He'll have details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Do you or someone you love have a gambling problem? Is it causing chaos to your life and relationships? Gamblers Anonymous holds weekly meetings on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. and Thursdays at 6 at 408 13th Street North. For more information, call 403-331-0822 or visit albertaga.net. Something new for anime fans. Every weekend, Nika Yuko Japanese Garden is hosting an Anime Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Watch videos on anime creation in the pavilion and learn fun trivia about your favorite anime characters. For more information, visit nikayuko.com. Go back in time and see what it was like to live as a pioneer. Coyote Flats Pioneer Village is a Western heritage museum located 1.5 kilometers south of Pitcher Butte. Walk through the village and see a railway station, post office, fire hall, school, and so much more. The museum is open daily from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. with admission of $10 for adults or $20 per family. Mobility scooters are available to guests by donation. For more information, visit coyoteflats.org. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
The Trudeau Liberals have brought in new legislation to help businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic, but business groups say it's not enough. To talk about this in more detail is political reporter Brian Lilly joining me once again from Toronto. Brian, the Conservatives have been asking the Liberals for more flexibility in the federal wage subsidy and even commercial rent relief programs.
Yeah, the commercial rent relief program was much heralded back in the spring when it came in, but there was supposed to be, I think, more than $1 billion set aside, and it came and went, and very few people took up on it. Not because businesses didn't try and say, hey, look, I'd like to be part of this rent relief subsidy, but because of the way it was structured and the fact that landlords had to sign up for it, well, most of them just didn't. And so the money sat there, it didn't get used. The Liberals acknowledged that it was a problem. They decided to restructure it, but there are still questions about whether it's being done in the right way. Meanwhile, with the wage subsidy, if you remember, when it was first brought in, it was 10%. The NDP and the Conservatives said, no, if you don't bring in a 75% wage subsidy, employers are just going to lay everyone off and they're all going to be on CERB. There was already evidence that that had happened with businesses that couldn't wait while the wage subsidy program was designed. The Liberals eventually changed it, brought in the 75% one, but now it's up to 65%. And, there's a lot of business owners, Hal, looking at that and saying, up to 65%, that's a lot like when you see a sale that says up to 65% off. Right. Well, there might be one thing in there that's 65% off, but an awful lot are closer to regular price. So there's a lot of concerns around that. The Conservatives, though, had a motion this week trying to say, look, stop harassing businesses. You had to basically show next to nothing to qualify for the CERB. But the Trudeau Liberals have an odd relationship with business, even with small business. And I've been around politics a long time. Political parties will fight over big business and try and use big business to beat each other up. Oh, you're more in the pocket of Bay Street. No, you are. But they're all on the side of small businesses. And yet the Trudeau Liberals have described small business owners as tax cheats. They have come up with all kinds of ways to punish them. And then when it came to the different programs, they required audits and 2 years worth of corporate minutes and show us your books. And a lot of things that made it incredibly cumbersome. And so the Conservatives are trying to say, look, back off, start trusting people in the middle of this pandemic instead of punishing them when they're already dealing with enough.
Brian, a new poll says around 54% of Canadians think that COVID-19 shutdowns are based on real, actual medical evidence. But when it comes to Alberta, only 42% feel the same way. I guess many skeptics believe governments are using the pandemic to perhaps push their political agendas.
Well, it's a combination of things. So this is a poll from Meru Blue, one of the big polling firms in Canada now that's developed over the last few years. And they gave people taking the poll three options. Do you think it's real medical evidence? I want to quote them accurately. Real medical evidence, best guess, or is it political considerations? And as you said, 54% across the country said real medical evidence. That's not good if only slightly more than half across the entire country think real medical evidence is driving this. Albertans were the most skeptical, as you said, at 42%. In Atlantic Canada, it was about 68% said real medical evidence. But there was about a third that felt, I think they're making their best guess. And then the remainder were saying, well, it's just politics. As someone that covers this closely at both the provincial and the federal level, I'm going to say it's a bit of all three going into this alchemist mix. It's not even a chemistry mix. This is old-fashioned alchemy. And they're taking the best evidence they have, and they are taking political considerations, and they're trying to make their best guess because there's still a lot of this that we don't know. I mean, we just saw this week Dr. Tam say all those single layer or double layer masks that you've been wearing aren't good enough. You need to wear a triple layer one with a filter in the middle. That's a big change so many months into the pandemic.
Absolutely. You know, there's been a lot of chatter on social media recently about internment camps being built for COVID-19. Where have we heard that before? We're in history, you know. Now, you recently wrote about it and say, hey, it's simply not true.
Yeah, look, there was a request for information, not even a request for proposal, but what's called a request for information. The federal government posted it on their buy and sell website, and this got tongues wagging. And some people took it and said, this is proof of internment camps. What they're looking for are quarantine and isolation sites, which, shock of shocks to people, already exist in Canada. Now, you may not have been to one, you may not know anyone that's had to use them, but here's what we're talking about. People that either A, come into the country and test positive for COVID-19, or they are already in Canada, they live here, they may be born here, raised here, and they work here. But guess what? They've caught COVID-19, their living conditions, maybe they live in a small apartment and there's 5 people there. They don't have room to quarantine, they don't have a basement to go to. The way Aaron O'Toole did when he was quarantining with COVID-19. What are they going to do? So the government has set these up, and it's voluntary, and people are able, if they need to, go to these sites. They tend to be hotels and similar operations where you can just hole up in a room while you recover. Unfortunately, Hal, there are a lot of people that are just not believing anything the government says. They believe COVID is a hoax, or they believe the government wants to use it to round us all up. Yes, I believe there are political agendas being used during the pandemic, that people are pushing these agendas, using the pandemic as an excuse. That is absolutely happening. And we saw it in the throne speech, and we'll see it in the budget coming up. But the idea that the government is going to start rounding people up, it's simply not true. And if it were, I would be one of the first people telling you about it and fighting against it.
There were some recent reports that the Trudeau government had wanted to use the military to deal with what they're considering disinformation on COVID-19 and try to use military communications to change and sway opinion. Now that was rejected, but Brian, now a larger project is under consideration using the military as a propaganda tool? That sounds a little scary.
It really does. And as someone that many years ago spent a very small amount of time in communications for the Canadian Armed Forces, it's also disturbing. This is not what people sign up to the Canadian Armed Forces for. So the initial reports came out in the summer about attempts by the government to ask the military to start pushing back against what they felt was misinformation and to try and set the record straight. The military looked at what the government wanted them to do and didn't feel comfortable. Now there appears to be a plan, and let me just read off the name here. It is the Defense Strategic Communication Group that the government wants to use to advance national interest by using defense activities to influence the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of audiences. This is from an October 2020 document that has been uncovered by the media. So that has to be stopped. You cannot be having the Canadian Armed Forces using communications techniques to try and sway public opinion in favor of the government of the day. That is not and never has been the job of the military in a free and open democracy. You know, if you want to talk about how they've behaved in dictatorships or in less than favorable countries, sure, they've done that. That is not what we do in Canada. That is not what we do in democracies. This has to end.
It kind of sounds like maybe a little bit of an ethics violation. Where have we heard that before? The House of Commons Ethics Committee, Brian, is making a third attempt of investigating the We Charity scandal. The committee began debating a motion from NDP MP Charlie Angus to study possible conflicts of interest. Tell me more about that.
So this goes back to the committee hearings that we saw in the summer. And if you remember, one of the big questions was about the fees paid to different Trudeau family members. You know, almost $500,000 just to Margaret Trudeau, the Prime Minister's mother, in terms of speaking and appearance fees, flight costs, hotel costs, food, gifts, and everything else. Then money for his brother, a little, just not a lot of money, but a bit of money for his wife. It was mostly covering her costs as she was being a brand ambassador for them. But almost $500,000 to his mother to fly her around the world, pay her to show up, things like that. They said, okay, you know, we want to look into this. So they passed a motion in the summer calling for the organization that hires these, all of them, it's called Speaker Spotlight, to release what they've been paid for these gigs and others. Now, that passed in the summer, just literally hours before the committee was supposed to get those documents. The Prime Minister prorogued Parliament. That stopped the documents from being delivered. So they tried again. Weeks of filibustering ended when the Bloc Québécois suddenly swapped out MPs moments before a vote, and then the Bloc voted with the Liberals to say no. And they said, oh, sorry, it was a mistake. Doesn't look like a mistake. Maybe a deal was cut. We don't really know. But they're trying again. And by the way, that second motion, the Liberals said, we don't want you looking into the Prime Minister's mother, even though that, in my view, is the ethics violation. They said, okay, well, we'll take that out. The Liberals still didn't like it. So expect more filibusters, expect more parliamentary games on the Hill.
Brian, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was pressed repeatedly on the issue of freedom of expression in relation to the Mohammed caricatures. Now, you say Trudeau's defense of free speech doesn't really go far enough.
No, it doesn't, because he was asked, and by the way, the reporters and the Prime Minister both used the terms freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Some Canadians seem to think we don't have freedom of speech. We only have freedom of expression, and somehow expression doesn't cover speech. I don't know how they come to this conclusion, but I've been hearing about from them for a week now. The Prime Minister said that there are limits on free speech, and he's correct. And he gave the example of you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Fine. But then he pivoted and started talking about how we can't give offense to people either. Now, all of this is driven by the terrorist attacks that have happened in France and now in Austria as well, in retaliation for a teacher showing cartoons of the Muslim prophet Muhammad. If we are going to be told by our government, which is non-religious, that we cannot show images of one religious figure or another, then we are effectively adopting blasphemy laws. There is a well-known photo of the Prime Minister and his brother Alexandra, the one who was also paid by We Charity to speak, and they're both wearing matching sweaters of the famous Da Vinci's Last Supper. But instead of Jesus's face, it's a happy face emoji. There are lots of images, often paid for with government arts grant money, that mocks Christianity. And Christians have been told, you've got to deal with this. So for the Prime Minister to turn around and, when pressed on this issue, because it is Islam, say, no, we can't give offense, that's not freedom of speech. I do not want to publish the Charlie Hebdo cartoons of Muhammad. But as I wrote in The Sun, we also don't want to publish the Charlie Hebdo cartoons of Jews or the Catholic Church hierarchy that they regularly publish. Why? Because they're offensive. But just because something is offensive doesn't mean it can't be published, or I can't defend somebody else's right to publish it. The Prime Minister has been weak on this. Emmanuel Macron actually called Quebec Premier François Legault to thank him for his strong support of freedom of expression, freedom of speech. He did not call Justin Trudeau.
Brian, a guy who ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, says he will not seek a seat in the next election. Peter MacKay says he really wants to focus on his private life.
And I can't say that I blame him. Peter MacKay ran for the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party a long time ago, back around 2002, 2003. He gave that up to help form the Conservative Party of Canada, was a loyal soldier for Stephen Harper. He ran in this last round to be the next leader of the Conservative Party, lost to Erin O'Toole, and now he says, you know what, I gave a lot of years of my life. I'm going to focus on my wife and kids and starting a new career. I say that we owe Peter MacKay our gratitude. This is a man who served as Foreign Affairs Minister, as Justice Minister, and most importantly, from 2007 to 2013, as Canada's Defence Minister at the height of the war in Afghanistan, when our troops were facing some of the worst times. He was there and in charge, making sure that they were equipped, making sure that they had the best ability to go forward that they could from the political establishment that sent them there. He deserves our gratitude for his public service.
Yeah, he certainly had a celebrated career as a politician. Our political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
Canadians have long believed that freedom of speech is a fundamental right. There seems to be a growing threat to freedom of expression on university and college campuses. Joining me now to chat about this a little bit more is James Kitchen, a lawyer with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining me via Skype from Calgary. James, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
Now, can you first of all explain to our viewers what the Campus Freedom Index is all about?
It's a report on the state of free speech generally across the country at universities, but it also contains a detailed report on each public university across the country, of which there's 61. And we give a grade to each university on their policies and on their actions, and also to the student unions as well. So it's an excellent tool. For example, if you're a student or a parent and free speech on campus is something that's really important to you, then you can go and look up your specific university that you're considering about and see where they stand on free speech.
So viewers can read about the whole Campus Freedom Index on your website, but how can you really get into detail about how some of the results are measured?
So there is a website dedicated to the Campus Freedom Index. I think it's campusfreedomindex.ca. And on there's a whole tab dedicated to our methodology. Right, so you can see the criteria that we grade each university on, and how we arrive at the grades. We give a letter grade, A down to F, right, just like you would get if you were at university, right? And if you're really good on free speech, you get an A. And if you censored something that year, you're going to get an F.
Now, 61 campuses, as you mentioned, were graded, out of which only 8 A's were given out. Are you guys being a little tough here on the post-secondary institutions, or are we seeing policies that maybe are infringing on people's freedoms?
I wouldn't say we're being tough. I would say that that's just a reflection of the poor state of free speech on Canadian campuses, right? If we gave 0 A's, I would say we're probably being a little tough. But those that get A's have earned them, right? University of Lethbridge is a good example. It's one of the best every year consistently. Its policies are good, and they almost always follow through on those policies and uphold free speech. There's a lot of universities that have good sounding policies, like the University of Toronto, for example. They don't follow through on them. Right, so they never get a really good grade. Because in order to get an A, you got to get an A in your policies and both in your actions each individual year, right? So it's just there's a lot of campuses that don't have good policies, and they censor more often than not, and so they're going to get poor grades.
Why do you think it is that some post-secondary institutions are not committing themselves to upholding our freedom of expression, which is a pretty important right here?
Well, I think a lot of universities have lost their way. Right, their whole modus operandi is the search for truth, academic inquiry, free thought, free exploration of ideas, the consideration of all ideas, no matter how unpopular or dissident. At least that's what the university was founded on, right, for hundreds of years. But universities have lost their way, right? They have a very Marxist worldview about them, and Marxism is opposed to that, on a philosophical level, and that's pervaded most universities, right? So. That's just what's happened over the last few decades. They've lost that, and they've strayed into it's all about social justice now, right? Which is not commensurate with free speech. So naturally, we have more censorship than not, because that's a reflection of the ultimate worldview that's shared by these universities' administrations.
Do you think we're seeing a bit of a cancel culture making its way into universities?
I think we're seeing A lot more than a bit. I think cancel culture is something. Actually, I think campuses are ground zero for cancel culture. I think that's where it started. That's where it was born over the last 2 decades, and it's now spreading like a virus, I would say, to the rest of society. Right? It's spreading into the workplace. It's spreading into government offices. It's like a cancer. That is destroying the culture of free speech that a society needs in order to remain free and democratic, right? These institutions are not free and democratic, right? I mean, you say something the wrong way over there, and you lose your job, whether you're a professor, whether you're a non-professor staff. You get academic discipline if you're a student. It's horrendous what happens to these people if they don't speak the orthodoxy when they're on campus.
So in your opinion, how can students and maybe parents of students fight back?
Well, I guess the first thing is to get informed, right? I mean, this is a serious problem that I don't think a lot of people are really aware of until it happens to them, right? They're not really aware of it in general. I mean, most people don't. I don't think most people think about the free speech situation on a campus before they choose it as the place that they're going to spend 50 grand on and 4 years at, right? That needs to be, if you start making that a criteria, right? I mean, universities are going to essentially give students what they want. If you want this cuddly little place where you don't have to see or listen to anything you don't like, if enough students want that, that's what they're going to get. That's what the university is going to give them. So if students and parents start demanding that free speech is a critical part of their education, then maybe the universities will respond a little bit. That's probably the first place to start.
Now let's circle back to the University of Lethbridge, James, for just a moment here. It received an A grade, but the A grade was given for the university's policies and practices, and only a C was given for the U of L's student union's policies and practices. Why the discrepancy there?
Well, that's not uncommon. Student unions tend to be even worse than universities, right? Because they're run by students, right? And a lot of students these days are very, very progressive, socially, politically, in their worldview, which they buy into a lot of the Marxist narrative and the social justice narrative, and of course, within that narrative, within that worldview, there's very little tolerance for dissident or unpopular expression or uncomfortable expression, right? There can't be anything other than the orthodox view, and anything to do with sexuality or gender or race or historical oppression or anything like that. Climate change. I mean, litany of issues, right? And it tends to be the more progressive students that want to get into student government, right? The whole change the world kind of thing, and the business students who maybe take a more progressive or more conservative outlook on the world, they're not the ones that are running to run the campus, right? To run the student union. So generally, their policies are terrible because it's all social justice oriented type policies, and they don't tolerate dissent. They don't tolerate different opinions, right? If there's some conservative student that's saying something they don't like, that maybe questions BLM, for example, they want to shut that down, right? So very few student unions in the country, regardless of how good the university is, are good on free speech. It's not there.
James, let's also consider the increase of universities who received failing grades. Many of these universities, while publicly defending freedom of expression when pushed, they'd rather censor or cancel, leading to that cancel culture we were just discussing, events that they deem politically incorrect. What are your thoughts?
I think sometimes that's a reflection of the personal political views of the administration. Sometimes, but I think a lot of other times it's that the universities are not necessarily politically motivated. I think they're quite apolitical, but they're just very scared. They're not willing to take the risk and use the resources to defend free speech. So one of the most common examples that we see from the administration will say, well, there's a security threat, right? Antifa is going to come and pull the fire alarm or protest or smash windows or threaten people or push people, and we don't want to deal with that. So because of that, we're not going to allow this to go ahead. That's the most common excuse, right? Which isn't so much that the university is necessarily favoring censorship. They don't want to see that happen, right? They don't want to see all this violence. They'd like people just be able to talk and it be civil, right? But when push comes to shove, there's a lot of universities that aren't willing to take a stance and say, you know what, yes, this is going to cost us some money and security, but we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to defend free speech, and we're going to get security there, and we're going to protect people's ability to talk. You know, we're not going to let people throw things and ring the cowbells and pull the fire alarms. We're going to do the right thing. Most universities just, they're not committed enough to free speech to make that expense.
Now, James, let's chat a bit about Jessica Yaniv, a transgender activist who until recently had filed numerous human rights complaints. Can you share a little bit of backstory and the outcome of these complaints?
So the backstory is that Jessica filed several human rights complaints against several aestheticians who specialize in body waxing, right? Specifically, what Jessica wanted was the waxing of the groin genital area, right, which is a very specialized procedure. And these women, many of which are immigrant women and have, you know, very important religious and cultural beliefs about you know, being around a person with male genitalia. So they refused. And so on that basis, Jessica filed a complaint claiming gender identity and gender expression. So ultimately, those complaints were not upheld, and the complainants, or sorry, the respondents, the statisticians, they won basically. That's what the outcome of that was. A few more complaints were filed afterwards. Those were eventually dropped. So at this point right now, all the aestheticians who were looking at trouble with the Human Rights Commission have won. And they're able to continue on, and they've not been penalized, and we consider that, you know, the proper outcome.
Have some of the complainants maybe taken it upon themselves to maybe sue Jessica now, saying you put our business, you put us through a lot of trauma and stress, and now we need to be compensated for this?
It was traumatizing for some of them, right? To go through this experience. Jessica did end up paying costs. It's unusual, but sometimes the Human Rights Commission will award costs when complainants cause a lot of trouble, as Jessica did. And so some costs were paid by Jessica and were received by the complainants.
Do we know how much?
Or sorry, by the respondents. I believe the amount was $6,000.
Okay. Now, is there anything, James, that can be done to prevent individuals from continuously launching what appears to be frivolous human rights complaints? I mean, many times these complaints make life very difficult for people you just talked about who are simply trying to earn an honest living.
It's a serious problem. There is, I mean, one of the deterrents, right, is the costs, right? Costs are used by whether it's courts or tribunals to deter those sorts of frivolous complaints, right? So Jessica's aware that if more frivolous complaints come in, there's going to be cost consequences. Eventually, I think you know, there is a process by which we could petition the tribunal to declare Jessica as a vexatious complainant, and you know, in that case, there'd be a further barrier to Jessica filing further complaints. And I mean, I'd like to see that happen if this continues. At this point, there's no pending complaints. They've all been withdrawn.
The Justice Centre has also issued a legal warning to Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro on behalf of a Calgary businesswoman who's prohibited from leaving her home even to walk her dog. What is this case all about?
So that's to do with the mandatory universal quarantine, right? And what I mean by universal is that regardless of symptoms, regardless of negative test results, these quarantine measures are in place, right? Which in, you know, in our perspective is overbroad, right? It does make sense so far as it goes to quarantine someone who is experiencing symptoms or has tested positive. But beyond that, it's a serious rights infringement, right? I mean, it's essentially house arrest, right? To be stuck at home. That's a penal sanction, right? And people should not be incurring that unless there's actually at least some evidence that they may be actually infected. If there's no symptoms and there's a negative test result, it doesn't make any sense. And so it's a rights violation that doesn't have anything to justify it. So in that specific case, we had gone to court this last Friday to get an injunction. We were not successful, although you know, we felt that it was a good case. It was worth the time. The judge was very receptive, and this is something we're probably going to continue to explore because these quarantines of massive numbers of healthy people has to come to an end.
Now, the City of Edmonton has outfitted the high-level bridge with 60,000 programmable lights through the Light the Bridge program. James, the City of Edmonton invites members of the public and community groups to request the bridge be lit up in specific colors to reflect basically their event, cause, or campaign. Now, in 2019, the Alberta March for Life Association applied to the City of Edmonton to have the bridge lit up in the colors of pink, blue, and white, and the application was approved by the city, but then later cancelled due to the polarizing nature of the subject matter. Can you explain how the Justice Centre is moving on this?
So we filed a court application challenging that decision. We're also challenging the criteria under which the city made the decision, because of course in their criteria, they grant themselves the right to cancel anything they unilaterally consider to be polarizing. Of course, we don't know what polarizing means. There's no definition of that, and it could mean anything under the sun. And, you know, of course, as any astute observer will see, any number of things can be polarizing, right? Anytime you have a topic on which there's some disagreement, and that's most topics in the world, you're going to have some polarization, because you're going to have some people that agree with it and some people that oppose it. So we filed a court application challenging that as an infringement of free speech, right? Because the government, as they got this bridge, they have lights, and the public is able to ask that the bridge be lit up in their color, right? So that's a form of expression, kind of a strange one. There's no words involved, right? It's just colors, but there's still expressive content. There's meaning there, right? When the bridge is lit up for orange and blue, everybody knows it's for the Oilers. There's meaning in those colors, right? So there's meaning when the bridge is lit up for what people want it to be lit up for, which means that that space, that bridge, is actually constitutionally protected, right? So the government cannot censor what colors go on that bridge based on the content, unless there's a good reason for it, right? So we say what the City of Edmonton has done is they've infringed the free speech rights of the March for Life, and so we're going to be seeking a declaration from the court that decision is null and void because it's unconstitutional, right? It's a breach of free expression.
James Kitchen, lawyer for the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. Thanks for joining me today from Flames Country, Calgary.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.